My grandmother fed 9 children from a garden you could cross in 8 steps. She never set foot in a garden center in her life. Her fertilizer came out of the kitchen, her pest control came out of the wood stove, and her planting calendar hung in the night sky. Folks today spend hundreds of dollars to grow a handful of tomatoes, but Grandma grew more food than her family could eat. I am a grandmother myself now, and I still use her 12 best tricks. The last one is why my garden gets better every single year. Number 12, the water on pies, the water in your cooking pot. When Grandma boiled potatoes, carrots, or greens for supper on that old wood stove, the cloudy water left in the pot never went down the drain. She set the pot on the kitchen windowsill to cool while the family ate. And after the dishes were done, she poured it into an old milk jug she kept under the sink for exactly this. Then she carried it out through the screen door and gave it to the tomatoes. I know it sounds like nothing, except that cloudy water is holding minerals and starches that cooked out of the vegetables, and garden plants drink it up like a tonic. The leafy things love it most. Her lettuce and her collard greens got the first pour, and the tomato beds got the rest. On summer evenings, you could see her crossing the yard in her apron with that jug, making her rounds like a nurse on a ward. Bath water for the plants, she called it. I watched neighbors up and down our road pour that same water into the sink for 50 years while they drove to town to buy fertilizer in a paper bag. She thought that was the funniest thing she ever heard. Give it to your beds once or twice a week, always cooled all the way, and make sure the pot was unsalted because salt in the soil undoes every bit of the good. Within a few weeks, the leaves on those plants go a deeper green and the stems thicken up under your fingers. Supper fed the family, and then it fed the garden. That was her way. Nothing with a job left in it ever got thrown out of that kitchen. And the kitchen was just getting started. Number 11, eggshells. If you have ever grown a beautiful tomato that turned black and leathery on the bottom just as it ripened, that is blossom end rot. And it broke my heart the first summer I saw it in my own rows. The plant is starving for calcium. Grandma kept an old coffee can on the shelf beside the stove, and every eggshell cracked in that house went into it. When the can filled up, she spread the shells on a cookie sheet and dried them in the sun on the porch rail until they snapped like crackers. Then she crushed them to powder with her wooden rolling pin right on the porch table and worked a handful of that white powder into the soil around the tomatoes and the peppers. At transplant time, she went one better and dropped a spoonful of crushed shell straight into every planting hole. So the calcium sat waiting right where the roots would reach. Crushed shell breaks down slowly, so the roots get a steady drip of calcium all season instead of one big gulp. And the coarser pieces do double duty. Slugs and snails hate dragging their soft bellies over those sharp little edges. So a ring of broken shell around a young transplant works like a fence around a hen house. One kitchen scrap, 2 jobs, and not a penny spent. The fruit ripened sound and whole, right to the bottom, and whatever shell was left over went into the compost pile to feed next year's dirt. Through the winter, that coffee can filled 2 or 3 times over. And the crushed shell waited in a mason jar beside the canning lids until the ground thawed. Number 10, seeds. Some seeds sit in the ground for 2 weeks and sulk, and some seedlings come up pale and wobbly and never quite catch up to their brothers. Grandma had a fix before the seed ever touched dirt. She took her old chipped mixing bowl, dissolved 1 tablespoon of Epsom salt in a gallon of warm water, and let her seeds soak in it for 4 to 6 hours before sowing. Not overnight, mind you. A long soak past that and the seeds get waterlogged and lazy. Epsom salt is magnesium, and magnesium is one of the sparks a seed needs to wake up and push. The soak softens the hard seed coat and feeds that first little root the moment it stirs. Beans, corn, squash, tomatoes, peppers, nearly anything with a hard little shell comes up stronger for it. She lifted them out, patted them dry on a flour sack towel, and sowed them the same afternoon. Her rows came up thick, even, and days ahead of the neighbors' rows, little green soldiers standing in a line. Skip the soak for the fine, dusty seeds like carrots, though, because those do better sown dry. The bag of Epsom salt costs pennies at any pharmacy and lasts for years on the shelf. For seed packets that had sat in the drawer a few years, she ran a little test first. A dozen seeds rolled up in a damp dish towel on the whatever sprouted in that towel told her if the packet was worth a row. She called the whole soaking business giving the seeds their morning coffee. I still say that out loud every spring, standing at the same kind of kitchen counter she stood at, and I hope somebody says it after me when I'm gone. The banana peel. Fruiting plants get hungry in a particular way. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, and roses all crave potassium when it is time to flower and set fruit, and potassium is... Grandma buried her peels a few inches down beside the plants, where they would break down in the dark and feed the roots for weeks. When she wanted something faster, she cut a few peels into a big jar of water and let it steep on the porch rail for 2 or 3 days. Then she poured that banana tea around the base of her tomatoes and her climbing roses by the fence. Those roses got the same feeding as the vegetables, and she never once bought a box of rose food in her life. In the winter, she did not waste a single peel either. She dried them on the windowsill above the stove until they went black and crisp, then crumbled them into a paper sack, and the difference shows up where it counts. More blossoms hold on instead of dropping in the June heat, and the fruit comes in redder and sweeter. My mother did it, her mother did it, and now my daughter rolls her eyes at me and does it anyway because her tomatoes keep winning ribbons at the county fair. If your grandmother had a trick like this one, put it in the comments below because I sit down with my tea in the evening and read every single one. Number 8, the 3 sisters. Everything so far has been about feeding one plant at a time. But Grandma's biggest harvests came from plants feeding each other, and this trick is older than the country itself. Native farmers were planting this way for centuries before any of our grandmothers learned it, and they named the 3 crops the sisters. It is still the smartest use of one garden bed I have ever seen. You plant corn, beans, and squash together in the same wide mound of soil. The corn goes in first and stands up tall. Once the young corn stood about a hand high, Grandma tucked the bean seeds in around each stalk, and the beans climbed. Last came the squash seeds around the edges of the mound. One thing to get right here, use the tall climbing pole beans because the little bush kinds will not climb the corn no matter how you sweet talk them. Beans pull nitrogen out of the air and fix it down into the soil, which happens to be the very nutrient corn is greediest for. Meanwhile, the squash sprawls across the ground beneath them both, and its big, rough leaves shade the soil, hold the moisture in. 3 crops from one patch of dirt with no trellis, no fertilizer bill, and half the weeding. Come August, she walked into that corn with her apron out, picking beans at eye level and lifting squash off the ground under the leaves. Her little plot produced like a plot twice its size because nothing in it worked alone. Hold on to that idea while the corn is still standing because the trick waiting at number 1 takes it even further. Number 7, plant bodyguards. Something will always come to eat your garden. Aphids, whiteflies, rootworms, they found Grandma's beds the same way they find yours. But she never once bought a spray, and she never owned a sprayer. She planted basil right at the feet of her tomatoes, tucked in close so the 2 grew up together, because basil's scent muddled. Then she ringed the whole garden with marigolds, a border of them running along every edge like a low orange fence. That sharp marigold smell turns away aphids above the ground and nematodes down below it, and the bright flowering. And the bees matter more than people think. Every blossom a bee visits is one more squash or one more cucumber that actually... I used to stand at the garden gate in the early morning and hear the whole border humming before I could see a single bee. So the flowers were never decoration. They were the security team and the welcome wagon at the same time. More blossoms pollinated, fewer leaves chewed, more food picked at the end of the row, all from a packet of flower seeds that costs less than a cup of coffee. And when the marigolds browned off in the fall, she snapped the dry flower heads into a paper envelope and shook the seeds loose. The stove heated her house all winter, and the ash from it fed the garden the rest of the year. When the firebox got cleaned out, the cold ash went into a metal bucket that lived by the back door, and before it ever touched the sifted ash kept dry in a lidded can on the porch, because ash that sits out in the rain gives up its goodness before it ever reaches a plant. Come spring, she sprinkled a thin gray ring of it around the tomatoes, the squash, and the peppers. Ash carries potassium and calcium, the same nutrients folks pay good money for at the store, and it sweetens soil. Keep it to a light dusting, because a heap of ash pushes the soil too far the other way. The dry ring is also a wall. Slugs and snails will not crawl across it because the ash wicks the moisture right out of their soft bodies, and they turn back at the edge like they hit a fence. Her pepper plant stood inside those gray rings all summer, fat and untouched. 2 warnings from her, and I will pass them both on. Keep ash away from the potatoes and the blueberries, because those two actually like their soil on the sour side. And lay the ring down fresh after every rain, since water washes the protection away into the dirt. Beyond that, it is free, and if you heat with wood, it never runs out. Waste was about the only thing that ever made that woman cross. Now, if an old woman's tricks are earning their keep so far, do me a kindness and hit subscribe. I share the old ways of the garden and the kitchen on this channel, and every new neighbor helps these tricks find more gardens. Because the next one is the trick that carried her beds through every heat wave. Number 5, the buried pot. Take an unglazed clay pot, the plain reddish kind, plug the drain hole with a wine cork, and bury it up to its neck. Fill it with water from the can, and set a saucer on top as a lid. If you are not sure a pot will do, drip a little water on the outside of it. Unglazed clay drinks the drop-in and darkens, while the shiny glazed kind just sheds it, and the shiny kind is no use here. Fired clay is porous, so the water seeps out slowly through the pot walls, straight into the root zone, exactly as fast as the soil around it dries. Nothing evaporates off the surface, nothing runs off down the path, and the roots grow deep toward that steady supply instead of lazing around near the top waiting on a hose. And here is the best part. You can stand right there and watch it work. A dark circle of damp soil spreads out around the buried pot, and the plants inside that circle stand up straight through the hottest afternoon. Desert farmers were watering this way thousands of years ago, and Grandma was doing it with chipped pots the church rummage sale could not sell. In July, while the neighbors dragged hoses around the yard twice a day, she topped up her buried pots every 3rd morning with the watering. Each pot waters the plants within arm's reach of it, so space a few through the bed and let the clay do the walking. Now the next one is how she grew a whole sack of potatoes on a back porch. Number 4, the potato tower. You can grow a sack of potatoes without a field. All it takes is something that holds soil and stands about knee-high or better. An old barrel, a wooden crate, even a stack of burlap sacks with the tops rolled down. Grandma used a wooden barrel with the bottom knocked out, set right on the porch end where the sun hit all day. First, she lined up her seed potatoes in a reorganization carton on the windowsill until each one grew stubby green sprouts. Then she set those sprouted potatoes on a few inches of soil in the bottom of the barrel and covered them over. Every time the green stems grew a hand's width above the dirt, she buried them again, right on up the barrel, always leaving just... A potato plant sets new tubers all along any stem you keep in the dark. So instead of one layer of potatoes under the ground, she grew a whole column of them climbing up inside that barrel. The one chore a tower asks of you is water, because a barrel dries out faster than open ground. She gave it a good drink every morning she watered the hens, and a layer of straw between the soil layers held that moisture longer. Come fall, there was no digging, no bent back, and no stabbed spuds on the garden fork. She tipped the barrel over on the grass, and the harvest rolled out at her feet, clean and whole, a full sack of potatoes from. And save your fish bones this week, because you are about to bury them. Number 3, bury the fish. This is the oldest trick on the whole list, and it came down to our grandmothers from native farmers who were setting a fish beneath their. After a fish supper, Grandma took the heads, the bones, and the trimmings out to the garden in yesterday's newspaper. Then she pushed a stick into the dirt to mark the spot, so come planting time, the seeds went in directly over the buried fish. Deep matters, both to keep the raccoons and the neighborhood cats from treasure hunting in your beds, and to put the goodness down below. She liked to plant the fish in the fall, too, so it had all winter under the snow to melt into the bed. As the scraps break down, they release nitrogen and phosphorus, slow and steady, right through the hungriest weeks of the growing season. Those are the same 2 ingredients printed on the front of every fertilizer bag at the store, except hers came free with Friday supper. In good fishing summers, my grandfather brought home more bluegill than the family could eat, and every one of the little ones went under a hill of corn. The corn planted over a fish stood a head taller than the corn that was not, with stalks thick as a broom handle, and my grandsons still call that back corner of my garden the fish patch, and they hold their noses walking past it in April just for the joke. Number 2, planting by the moon. Now this is the one that gets me the funny looks at the garden club, so let me just tell you what she did. Her farmer's almanac hung on a nail by the kitchen door, the pages worn soft as cloth from her thumb, and she checked the moon before she planted anything. While the moon was growing toward full, she sowed everything that bears above the ground: lettuce, beans, corn, tomatoes, all. Once the moon began to shrink, she switched to everything that bears below. Carrots, potatoes, onions went in on the waning moon. She even pulled her worst weeds in the dark of the moon, because the old folks held that weeds pulled then come back slower. The old reasoning goes that the same pull that moves the tides draws moisture up through the soils as the moon waxes. A new almanac showed up in her Christmas stocking every year, and the old one went out to the garden shed because she could not bear to burn one. I remember her standing at the porch rail after supper, looking up past the clothesline to check the sky like other folks check a wristwatch. Plenty of good gardener. Plenty of good gardeners do. All I can tell you is that her almanac was worn to rags, her rows never came up patchy, and I have kept the habit for. The garden ran on a calendar nobody could sell her. But the moon only tells you when to plant. Her last trick decided what was worth planting at all, and it is the reason her garden got better every single year. Every fall, Grandma walked her rows slow, like a judge at the county fair, looking for the strongest plant in each one. The plant that shrugged off the blight, carried the heaviest crop, and tasted best at the supper table. She let that plant's finest fruit hang on the vine past ripe instead of picking it for supper until a tomato went soft and heavy in the hand. Then she squeezed the seeds and their gel into a jar of water and left it on the counter for a few days until the mix went cloudy. That little ferment strips off the slick coat around each tomato seed the same way rot would do it in nature, and the seeds sprout better for it. She rinsed them in a flour sifter, dried them on a saucer for a week, and poured them into a labeled glass jar, the label. And that row of little jars does something bigger than save the price of a seed packet. Every seed from that plant carries the traits that won in her soil, her weather, her patch of ground. Do it year after year, and the garden itself learns your yard. The tomatoes settle in a little more at home in that dirt every single season. Her tomato line stayed in our family plot for 40 years, and it outgrew anything off a rack in town because nobody had that work is yours, and it takes nothing but a saucer and a jar. If tomato seed sounds fussy for a first try, start with beans or peas. Let a few pods dry brown and rattle on the vine, shell them into a jar on a winter afternoon, and there sits next year's crop, free and ready. Trade a few saved seeds over the fence with a neighbor, and you grow your library without spending a dime. That is why her garden got better every year and why mine still does. The seeds in my jars this winter trace all the way back to her apron pocket. She never really left, you see. I plant her every spring. Now go pour tonight's supper water on your tomatoes and pull up a chair here whenever you want the rest of the old ways.